evening, everyone. Thank you for being there this evening. I, Architect Mildred Jose, extend a very warm welcome to all the participants on the third day of the webinar lecture series organized by the Center for History and Archaeology. We have had two eminent speakers in the earlier sessions sharing with us their views on two varied and interesting topics. As I move on with the introduction of the speaker for today, I would like to remind our audience that our chat box will be open 15 minutes before the session concludes. Kindly feel free to use the chat box for posting your queries. With that introductory note, it gives me immense pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Rajiv Kumar. Dr. Rajiv is an assistant professor at Department of History, Culture and Archaeology, School of Social Sciences, Central University of Himachal Pradesh. Prior to this, he has worked as a research associate in an ICSSR program titled An Analytical Study of Debates on Jammu and Kashmir in Indian Parliament and Legislative Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir at Maharaja Agrasen College, University of Delhi, and as an assistant professor at Deshbandhu College, Satyavati College, School of Open Learning, Non-Collegiate Women's Education Board, University of Delhi, and as an academic counselor at IGNOU. He has also worked as a research assistant at Center for Land and Warfare Studies. He has done his MA, MPhil, and PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He has co-edited a book titled India Nepal, 7 Decades of Trust and Partnership, and has contributed a chapter in an edited book. He has also contributed 3 book reviews in Diaspora Studies, Clause Journal, and The Discussant, and published several research articles in national and international journals and magazines. He has presented several papers in national and international seminars and conferences. With that elaborate description, I request your attention and help me welcome our speaker for the day, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, who will be enlightening us on the topic Interstate Relations in Kautilya's Arthashastra. Over to you, Dr. Rajiv. Sir, please come on board.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the kind introduction. I'm Dr. Rajiv Kumar, as you have already introduced. So I'll be speaking on interstate relations in Kautilya's Arthashastra. To begin with, I'll first of all like to make some remarks. Today we are living in a world which is interconnected, which is globalized, and which is borderless. So in this context, in the present scenario of borderlessness, the world we are living in, the very concept of hard state or hard power becomes redundant. But at the same time, we have had episodes in history, in Indian history as well as in world history, where we have continuously experienced this hard power relationship or the balance of power exercised at various intervals. Hard realism, some historians or some political scientists call it realism or realpolitik of the hard kind, and some call the soft realism much better an option than the hard realism in contemporary context. But when we talk of Arthashastra, Kautilya's Arthashastra, what idea do we get in regarding this realism factor, and when we put in the interstate relationship in that scenario of realism or realpolitik? So to begin with, I would say there is possibly a misconception, a very big misconception in the Western world, that ancient India was ignorant of aspects, various aspects, such as the strategy or statecraft, administration of a state, and even historical sense per se, even though the Indian epics spoke of vast kingdoms. The epics we call Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which are more than 2,000, 3,000 years ago, which were written much earlier. They speak of vast kingdoms, they speak of war strategies, they speak of administrative skills and of major battles that were fought. So, in that context, Kautilya, uh, I think some 2,300 years ago, he described the principles of statecraft, diplomacy, and interstate relationships. And he described the principles of interstate relationship in the context of Mandala theory, which I would be elaborating upon later, the Shadguna Niti, the six-fold theory, which we call, and the Upayas, or the fourfold theory in international relations. So the strategic thinking in Cautilian strategic design, the grand strategic design we may call, it becomes evident through these theories, and particularly the six measures of foreign policy, also known as the Shadgun theory, which was very closely related to the strength and weakness of the state, respectively. But before going into the details and nuances of the interstate relations as prescribed by Kautilya, let us just ponder upon at some of the basic grounds considered essential for statecraft. So, Kautilya, how does Kautilya define Arthashastra? He defines statecraft as Arthashastra, in which Artha, by Artha, he denotes material well-being. According to Kautilya, the most important objective of a ruler, of the king, is nothing but to secure the material well-being of its people. In his words, in his own words, he says material well-being is supreme. Attainment of all other goals, that is dharma, kama, moksha, depends on material well-being. So it becomes very clear that the material well-being of the citizens, of the people, is of prime importance to the king. In ancient times, what was the main source of securing the material well-being? It was the land. Hence, the main idea in Arthashastra is how to acquire the land. One of the central focus points, you may say, is how to acquire the land. It is natural, thus natural for a state to go for acquiring land. The first land to be acquired in this scheme of things becomes the land of the neighbor, Parosi Rajya. So the first land to be acquired is that of the neighbor. Hence, neighbors in Cautilian perspective becomes natural enemies. However, this very interpretation, the modern interpretation of this very fact of Kautilya's perspectives is very objectionable and questioned many a times, because in Cautilian scheme of things, allies, enemies, friends, friend, and enemies, enemy, all these are to be taken into account before coming to any kind of conclusion. So hence the relations between the two states, as we may say, becomes the relation of war. And so, like very much like the Chinese strategist Sun Tzu's art of war, the Arthashastra also deals with the art of war, because Kautilya says that two states cannot coexist or cannot expand or cannot grow without war. So the main idea in Arthashastra is what? It is war. It is a strategic planning of war and victory, the balance of power, and geopolitics. In fact, Arthashastra, the very book written by Kautilya, can be considered as the very first textbook in geopolitics. Now, what is the concept of geopolitics? Geopolitics says that a state is an organism. And like any organism, state has to grow. If it fails to grow or expand, the state will what? It will perish or decay. So Kautilya's Arthashastra again challenges the Western view that Indians lacked a strategic culture. He presented a comprehensive theoretical framework for it of the interstate relations, of the foreign policy, which continue to deeply influence even the contemporary strategic culture, be it Indian, be it regional domination strategy. or be it the worldview. So we can see that written around 300 BC, the Arthashastra explains the entire course of a state formation. And within it, the conduct of foreign policy, the conduct of interstate relations through war, through diplomacy, so as to maximize the power of the conducting state. And adding to it, what did he do? He explicated maximization of national power and maximization of national power through material economic strength, which is gained by conquering territories adjacent to the ambitious state, which he calls Vizigishu, to which I will come later. So he says that it is gained by conquering territories adjacent to the ambitious state, and this was seen as a prerequisite for regional domination, which is ultimately the foreign policy objective of any state. Even today, in the contemporary context, if you add up to it, you see the maximization of national power. The national interest is of supreme concern for any nation, and it is very much gained through economic strength. However, the part of conquering territories is in the modern era not so relevant or not so easy or not so worthy. Everyone knows he was an advisor or a minister to the Mauryan king Chandragupta Maurya, and Kautilya explained to him what the best strategy for protection and defense of state was, which was ultimately for regional expansion. And thus, he saw neighboring states as perpetual enemies. Why? Because the neighboring states are always in a conflicting situation, of what? Of geopolitical interests. So writing on interstate relations and diplomacy, Kautilya laid down some basic principles. Now, what are those basic principles? These are 4 principles. The very first principle that he elaborated is that no state can ever exist in isolation. Every state needs some allies. Every state needs some friends, which he calls Mitra Rashtra. So no state can exist in isolation. The second, he says there are no permanent friends and enemies in interstate relations. So the goalpost keeps shifting. He then says the bordering state can never be a friend. Now, this can be questioned in modern perspective, in contemporary perspective. But if you see the Kautilyan Arthashastra from the framework of the time it was written, the states were always in a conflicting situation. So in that scenario, you can comprehend that the bordering states were always in war or war-like situation, in the preparation of war. So in that context, one can visualize that he is correct when he frames the thing that bordering states can never be friends. And he says any kingdom is an ally or enemy due to some features. And what features? What makes a kingdom ally or enemy? The geographical position with respect to the intending conqueror. That geographical position, or the geostrategic location or the proximity with respect to the conqueror, it makes a kingdom an ally or enemy of second or the third kingdom. So the main ideas in Arthashastra that deal with interstate relations are 4 or 5. The first one is the Mandala Siddhant. The second, related to the Mandala Siddhant, is the Saptanga theory, which we also call the Saptaprakar theory. The Shadagunya Niti, that is the 6-fold policy, the 4 upayas, and the types of wars that he talks about. According to Kautilya, the relations between the 2 states are relations of war, as we already discussed. And in this relation, the strength of lion prevails. So there must be a party which is victorious and a party that loses. In saying so, Kautilya becomes a realist who believes that interstate relations or international politics is a state of war and a struggle for power, the balance of power. Nations are either in war or in the preparation of war. Hence, in such situations, states can rely only on power, which in contemporary terms we can say offensive realism. So, what is offensive realism? It believes in power maximization rather than defense maximization, as it sees offense as the best defense. So, nations, when they are either in war or in the preparation of war, the state can rely only on this kind of mechanism, that is the offensive realism. The context of the Mandal Siddhanta or even Raj Dharma, which is the Kshatriya Dharma, is what? It is war. Hence, after coronation, any and every king has to start for expedition, as war is considered prerequisite, essential, necessary for the material well-being of the citizens, of the people. Also, in ancient India, there were various traditions of different yagnas, and like Ashwamedh yagna or Rajasuya yagna. So, what were these for? These were related to acquiring land, gaining victory, acquiring land. So, according to Kautilya, the king must aspire to become Chakravarti Samrat. Chakravarti Samrat. That is, he should strive to achieve not just victory, he should strive to achieve hegemony. Not just victory or not just balance of power, he should be hegemonic. He therefore addresses the king as Vijigishu, meaning one who aspires for victory over the whole world. So, what exactly is this mandala theory, which Kautilya sees as a prerequisite for an aspiring king or a Chakravarti Samrat to conduct his interstate relations? So, in the Arthashastra, the concept of mandala, it comes across as a circle of territories held by independent rulers. That is a concentric circle of kings, of rulers. It is also based on the view that neighbors, as we already said, I already said, they are natural enemies, as both the kings aim to achieve material welfare and acquire the same piece of land. Now, I would like to quote an example of relevance in the contemporary context. You see the territory of Kashmir. It is a undisputed part of India. But Pakistan and China both have their eyes upon territory of Kashmir. Why? Because it is full of resources and also strategically located. So, you see the triangle that we get in India, China, and Pakistan, this matrix, this triangular matrix, it becomes very important as per the Mandala Siddhant. Because here you see, we may not say we are natural enemies, but obviously we have something in that is not going along well between India, Pakistan, and China. On what? Over a piece of land, that is Kashmir. Mandala Siddhant also suggests that there are no permanent friend and enemy. We can also look at that. Our relationship with Pakistan or China has improved and has deteriorated at certain interval of time. After 70s, the relationship with China began to improve slowly. But before the 70s, the relationship was very much strained due to Pakistan factor, Kashmir factor, or the Tibet factor, the Dalai Lama factor. So, what does he say? Kautilya, he says, and I quote, when Vijigishu acquires the land of the enemy, the mandal of Vijigishu extends. Now the country which was Mitra, that is friend, will become enemy. Hence, what we see that nations seek hegemony as well as balance of power. When the king thinks of going for expedition in one direction, he must not ignore the enemies and friends in the opposite direction. So what exactly then Mandal Siddhant becomes? It represents balance of power among 12 states. Now, what are these 12 states? The first is the Vijigishu itself, that is the aspiring king. The second is the Ari, that is the enemy of Vijigishu. The third is the Mitra, the friend. The fourth is the Ari Mitra, that is the friend of the enemy. Fifth is the Mitra Mitra, that is friend of the friend. Sixth is the Ari Mitra Mitra, friend of the enemy's friend. Then comes the Parshni Graha. Now, what is it? One who attacks in the rear. The next is the Akarand, that is ally of the rear, ally of the Parshni Graha. The next is the Parshni Graha Sar, ally of the rearward enemy. The 10th is the Akarand Sara, an ally of the rearward ally. And the final two, which are very important, are the Madhyama, that is the intermediate or the indifferent state, and finally the Udasina, which can be seen as a neutral state, a state which keeps itself away from any kind of connections. So the Mandal Siddhant represents this balance of power between these kind of states. Now the neighboring kings thus belong to one or other of the four classes. Which classes? The Parshni Graha, the Akaranda, the Parshni Graha Sara, or the Akaranda Sara, which lied next beyond the one that was last mentioned. He was to enter into an alliance, but no connection he had to form with those who were remote. So Kautilya further he says, enemy states, that is the Ari, fall into two categories. Now you see, he even defines, we just modern, the preconceived notions of the Western scholars who have worked on Kautilya, they have just, their views on Kautilya have been very far-fetched. They have conducted studies on Kautilya, but they have not gone into the details of the ideas or the notions of Kautilya. He says that the enemy states fall into two categories, the natural and the artificial, on the basis of the geography or the psychological perception. So Ari Mitra and Ari Mitra Mitra, they were considered as natural allies of the enemy, thereby making them natural enemies as well. In the same tone, Parshni Graha and Parshni Graha Sara, they were identified as potential enemies which could attack Vijigishu from the rear flank as the latter expanded. Thus, both the former was classified as its artificial enemies. So, enemies, they fall into two parts. Similarly, Kautilya categorizes friendly states as natural allies and artificial allies, known as Mitra and Mitra Mitra, which were geographically adjacent to the natural enemies and were considered friendly to the Vijigishu, the aspiring king. Akaranda and Akaranda Sara, they were conceived as potential allies and friends of Vijigishu owing to their geographical connectivity, the geographical proximity to Parshni Graha and Parshni Graha Sara. So, thus, under this mandala framework, what does Kautilya do? He projects kingdoms or states as a series of adjacent or interconnected circles and describe their relationship to each other. In order to determine the kind of policy that needed to be adopted in each case, foreign rulers or states were classified by Kautilya under four heads: the enemies, the friends, the mediators, and the neutrals, the Udasina. So the inimical and friendly rulers again were divided into two kinds, which I already dealt upon, the natural and the artificial. So the ambitious state was the Vijigishu, which was placed at the center of the circle. In the mandala concept, he was placed at the center of the circle. Ari, that is the enemy, the natural enemy state with a contiguous territory to the Vijigishu. Then the Madhyama, which was the regional power having adjacent borders with both Vijigishu and the Ari. Thus, the Madhyama worked more as a buffer state, close to both the king, desirous of victory, and the enemy. And finally, the Udasin in the framework of the Mandala, the Udasin, which was the extra regional power lying outside the circle of states, which was distant from both the king and the enemy, and therefore could be considered as neutral. So, based on this classification, states were categorized as enemies, friends, allies, and neutral states in an international system. So, Kautilya says that war, diplomacy, interstate relationship, and foreign policy were conducted accordingly, taking these classifications into account. So, to protect the interest of Vijigishu and to establish a favorable regional order, Kautilya again advocates pursuing a balance of power by two means, by means of self-help and by means of alliances. So if we apply the Mandal framework onto current Indian strategic thinking and even foreign policy behavior, what is seen is revealing. Similar to the Kautilyan conception, as I already dealt upon, India's relations with Pakistan, China, or even other neighborly states, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and other neighbors, they are all based on this very Kautilyan conception of things, scheme of things. So in such a situation of conflict, or to effectively conduct the foreign policy or interstate relation, what policies Vijigishu can adopt? For this, Kautilya again has the answers. The measures that were to be adopted by the Vijigishu or the aspiring king to carry into effect the foreign policy was four, what he calls the four upayas, namely Sam, Dama, Danda, Bhed. Sam, the conciliation; Dan, the making of gifts; Danda, the war of punishment; and finally Bhed, causing dissensions. So the maintenance of a balance of power was one of the problems in foreign politics, which engaged the attention of the diplomats in ancient Israel. So what does Kautilya do? Kautilya insists that a monarch should always take care that none of the other powers, be the regional power, be the neighbors, or whoever, none of the power should grow either too strong or become too weak. So Kautilya believes that nations acted in their political, economic, and military self-interest, that the foreign policy or diplomacy will be practiced as long as the self-interest of the state was served, because every state acts in a way to maximize the power and self-interest, or what we can say in modern contemporary terms, the national interest. So he thought that the world was in such a state that the kingdom was either at war or was preparing for a war, and diplomacy was yet another weapon used in that constant warfare. So he kind of correlates war and diplomacy. So he believed that diplomacy is a series of actions taken by a kingdom such that it gains strength and eventually conquers the nation with which diplomatic ties were created. He also believed that treaties should be made in such a way that king benefits and serves the interest of the kingdom, the interest of the citizens of the kingdom. Now, talking of the Shadagunya Siddhanta or the sixfold policy, or what we call the war tactics, Kautilya says that the attitude of a ruler towards any foreign kingdom or towards any foreign ruler depended upon the special circumstances of each case. He means the ruler was supposed to adopt one or the other of the six sorts of policy. Now, what was these policies? He named them: peace, that is sandhi; war, that is vigraha; neutrality, asana; preparedness of war, yana; alliance, samasray; and double dealing, that is dvaidhi vibhava. Now he says that Vijigishu should opt for all these six sorts of policy according or depending upon the special circumstances of each case. Now, what is this special circumstances? Sandhi. or the alliance or the peace when it is to be opted? When the enemy is strong. Vigrah or war. In what case? Break the sandhi, start war if you are strong. Asana or halting, in case stationing of the forces near enemy's territories. Yana or military expedition, to, which means military exercise near enemy's territory. Samashray or seeking protection, in what case? Joining hands with those who have similar aims. Sam ashray. And finally, Dvaid bhav, that is dual policy. It means friendship with one enemy for the time being and enmity with the other. Don't open two fronts at the same time. So how critical thinking, how much critical thinking or the war tactics for the war tactics Kautilya implied is very much visible. So a circle of states in this framework, it consists of three kings, a ruler, his friend, and his friend's friend. Now, as each of these kings was supposed to possess six elements of state, that is the king, the minister, the country, the fort, the treasury, and the army. Thus, a circle consisted of 18 elements. 18 how? Three kings and six elements of state. So it becomes 18 elements. Now, foreign rulers being of four kinds. So there were thus four primary circle of states. So 12 kings and 72 elements of states. So a powerful and wise king had always tried to make himself the center, that is the Nabhi of the circle, and to make the friendly powers the spokes of the wheel, the Nemi. So in Kautilya's views, thus the expediency was to be the main consideration in foreign policy. He says, and I quote, if a king was weaker than his neighbor, he had to adopt a peaceful policy. But if he was superior in strength to his rival, he was to make war. If the circumstances be such that it was desirable to crush a rival, but this could only be done with the assistance of some other power, then the king had to adopt a policy of double dealing. Now, what does this imply? It implies that when transported to the external level, the order does find an important place in his mandala theory, that is the circle of states. So the mandala theory thus, it represents a unique order of states wherein one could identify one's enemies and allies on the basis of geographical proximity, but also in terms of material strength and cognitive intentions. For instance, for example, if one moves on to the mandala theory, one finds that the capacity of the state is important. Why? Because it directed strategy in engaging with a superior, inferior, or neutral state. So the state most proximate to the Saptanga theory could aspire to become the leader, the Vijikishu. So to read the mandala theory without the state means in terms of its capacity and strength, is therefore misconstrued given the emphasis Kautilya puts on the Saptanga theory. However, the cognitive element becomes important as circle of states, that is the mandala, consisting of allies, enemies, and neutrals. So while there were 12 actors which have been identified for classification and broad relevance, 5 primary set actors played important role. Now, who are these 5 important or independent actors? They need to be reckoned with, and they were the conqueror, the enemy, the ally, the middle kingdom, and the neutral king. So out of these 12, these 5 becomes the most important. So the rest of the actors, they were classified as per the sequence established for identifying enemies and allies, as I have already elaborated upon. So these actors were important as they acted as facilitators to measure the success of diplomacy. So the mandala thus constituted a total of 72 elements, which was numerically arrived by taking into account the individual attributes of the state, its allies, its enemies, the neutral king, and the middle king. The mandala theory represents a unique order of states where one could identify one's enemies or one's friends on certain parameters like geographical proximity, but also on terms of material strength or the cognitive intentions. So the Saptang theory therefore fits in with the Mandala theory. So while there were 12 actors which I talked about, which were identified for classification and broad relevance, but among these 12 actors, 5 independent actors were of prime importance. These were the conqueror, the enemy, the ally, the middle king, and the neutral king. So the more proximate a particular state was to the Saptang theory, the more susceptible and aware was one to become of its motivation. So the Mandala theory thus constituted a total of 72 elements, which was numerically arrived by taking into account the individual attributes of the state and the other 4 limbs. So in Kautilyan terms, the constituent units were predicated upon the internal strength, which ultimately gave the state a distinct identity of a superior state and an inferior state. Why superior and inferior? Because if the state declined in terms of its capacity and influence, it had to adapt to various situations in order to regain its relative influence in the mandala. So that makes the mandala a fluid entity rather than a rigid entity, because it was prone to transformational elements which were dependent ultimately on state capacity and influence. So this internal external dichotomy seems superficial in Arthashastra, and order was thus not an arrangement that was fragile. It was a grand strategic design. So the Kautilyan diplomacy was therefore about managing, about regulating, and balancing these 72 constituent elements through far-sighted tactics and stratagems. Now, talking of the efficacy and components of interstate relations, Kautilya further talks about 3 kinds of diplomats. The first is the Nishrishtarth or plenipotentiary, then the Parimitarth, that is with definite instructions for diplomacy, and the Shasanhar or the royal messenger. At the same time, Kautilya also enlists the certain immunities that these envoys on a mission enjoyed. That is, they were not to be killed. The freedom of movement within the state was to be allowed. They were to be allowed passage, and they were exempted from payment of all ferry and custom duties. So related to it, he also mentioned about the espionage system and the institutions, that is the sansthas of internal and external spies. Now, these were the situations when Kautilya in Arthashastra becomes a procrastinator. Now, what happens when the war becomes inevitable? Now, when war becomes inevitable, Kautilya suggests 3 types of wars depending on the situation. The Parakram Yudh, that is the open war, which decides the victorious and the loser. The Kuta Yudh, that is the treacherous war, that is by deceit, kind of guerrilla warfare. And the Tushnim Yudh, that is the silent war, kind of proxy war, like China is doing these days to India through Pakistan. So Kautilya mentions these 3 kinds of war when war becomes inevitable, depending on the case, respective case. At the same time, he also mentions 3 types of victories, conquests. The Dharma Vijay, which is a just conquest, which means as per rules of war. The Lobha Vijay, the greedy conquest, which means by giving economic inducement to the enemy's forces. And the Asura Vijay, the demon-like conquest, that is by cunningness or by unfair means or any other means. So overall, Kautilya offers wide-ranging and fascinating discussions on war and diplomacy, including his wish to have his king become a world conqueror or the Chakravarti Samrata, his analysis of which kingdoms were natural allies and which were inevitable enemies, his willingness to make treaties he knew he would break, his doctrine of silent war or a war of assassination against an unsuspecting king, and more and more. Now, many Indian historians are proud to embrace Kautilya's Arthashastra as a practical book of rugged political realism. Now, the work shows how the political world did work and not very often stating how it ought to work. So, the book frequently disclosed to a king what calculating and sometimes brutal measures he must carry out to preserve the state and the common good and the interest of the state and its citizens. So, in the world order of international politics, it is only natural that nations interact with each other through dissension or through force. So, a political realist typically argued that there would always be conflict in international relations and, in effect, rule by the strongest. So, Kautilya, in the same breath, in the boldest of his promise, claimed that one who knew his science of politics could conquer the world. And he says, one possessed of personal qualities, though ruling over a small territory, conversant with the science of politics, did conquer the entire earth, never lost. In Book 6 of Chapter 2, Kautilya identifies the broad instruments of state's foreign policy, and that is peace and activity. So, what exactly is peace and activity, and how does it fit in? So, Kautilya defines peace as that which brings about security of enjoyment of the fruits of work, and he defines activity as that which brings about the accomplishment of the works undertaken. So, the purpose of both peace and activity was to minimize threats and vulnerability, that is, to enhance security and thereby secure economic prosperity. And when the economic prosperity is secured, it will ultimately enhance acquisition. So, in Kautilya's scheme of things, therefore, treaties were also very important. And treaties were what? It were agreements between kingdoms of roughly equal power, agreements a king should break if they are no longer advantageous, and thus believing that a treaty will provide a wall of protection against a strong enemy would be a foolish act. If an ally with whom a king had a treaty became weakened, that was, if the treaty was no longer to a king's advantage, then the king needed to violate the treaty. So, you see, in diplomatic terms, in war and tactics, in interstate relationship, Kautilya prescribes various ideas, various notions in those times when the world or the kingdoms, the states were at war, at continuous war with each other. And that is why Kautilya had in his mind the preconceived notion of a neighbor being an enemy, more an enemy than a friend. And therefore, he prescribes that among the neighboring states, among the regional states, how to conduct the foreign policy or how to maintain the interstate relationship, making friends, making allies, and noting down the enemies who could be harmful to the nation's interest, to the interests of the citizens. So, in conclusion, I would say that Arthashastra of Kautilya is a classic IR theory. It's a classic of IR theory, international relation theory, because it provides insights and intellectual stimulus for IR theorizing. In foreign affairs, the optimization of the state factors, it provides leeway for non-violent conflict resolution. What are these upayas and shadgunas? These are for conflict resolution. So, both for reasons of morality and political rationality, war is ultima ratio for Kautilya. Now, Kautilya has been studied with variational alacrity in the scholarly world. Max Weber was the first Western social scientist to recognize Kautilya's Arthashastra as a foundational text in the evolution of political thought. After him, Hans Morgenthau mentions Kautilya in his Dilemmas of Politics. However, rejection of deterministic readings of Kautilya's configuration of interstate relations is quintessential to objectively comprehend Kautilya. Why? Because the Western scholars, the Western preconceived notions of Kautilya's scheme of things, they are more of a deterministic kind. they have studied Kautilya less and have talked of Kautilya more. So relations among states are thus shaped by a complex mix of capabilities, correlation of forces, of intentions, of values, and all the factors congruent with political realism. So all these you can see featured in the Arthashastra. That is why R.P. Kangle, in his study The Kautilya Arthashastra, he has made very pertinent observation on the relevance of Kautilya in even the modern era. He says, and I quote, "We still have the same distrust of one nation by another, the same pursuit of its own interest by every nation, tempered only by considerations of expediency, the same effort to secure alliances with same disregard of them in self-interest." So while the mandala theory as propagated in Arthashastra is often considered merely as an arrangement of states in concentric circles, the idea essentially was one of interstate linkages with its own complex degree of friendliness or animosity, or in modern parlance, of having allies and adversaries. This makes the notions and ideas of Kautilya still relevant. As our former National Security Advisor Shiv Shankar Menon had summed up the relevance of Arthashastra, he said, "The concepts and ways of thinking that the Arthashastra reveals is useful because in many ways the world which we face today is similar to that in which Kautilya operated in when he built the Mauryan Empire to greatness." So the strategic relevance of Arthashastra thus lies in understanding the philosophy behind it, as it was the intangible or the ideational elements which gave meaning and direction to concepts such as power, state, statecraft, and interstate relationships. Thank you very much. Hello.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for that insightful session. We are now open to questions from the audience. Please post your queries on the chat box, if any. Sir, we'll wait for a minute till we get some questions from our audience.
Sure, sure.
Yes. Okay, sir, I think there are no questions as of now. But for those among the audience who have questions further, may feel free to write to us through the email ID shared in the chat box. So thank you so much, Dr. Rajiv, for accepting our invitation and engaging our audience in a verbal and detailed conversation on theories of the mandalas, attributes and elements in the theory, role players and facilitators of Kautilya's Arthashastra. Thank you so much, sir, once again for your time. Here I, Architect Mildred Jose, your convener for today, conclude the third day of the webinar lecture series organized by Center for Archaeology and History. Last but not the least, thank you so much to all the participants of the webinar and all our well-wishers for making another day of a webinar lecture series a success. We apologize to the audience for starting 5 minutes later than the scheduled time due to some technical issues faced through Microsoft Teams app, because of which the earlier session link was sent, due to which some of you guys joined this session a few minutes late. We'll make sure you could catch up on the missed bit by checking on the YouTube link session shared after a few days on the ASSR YouTube channel. A gentle reminder to all our participants to fill in the feedback form. The link for the same is provided in the chat box. It is a humble request to all the participants to enter the same name in the feedback as used to enter this particular Microsoft Teams webinar. Hoping to see all of you again for the last session on the 29th of November, Sunday. Thank you and namaste.